And hopefully this will work. Yeah. So now it should be working again. All right. So now the next step is we're going to just, your first Linux video, right? So your first, we're going to get into the operating system itself. So I already have it configured. As I said, your homework for between today and Thursday, follow that document, download the CVM, build it up, and then you'll get to something, and then you'll want to check to make sure that it works, right? So you should then look at what I'm about to do. Just follow these steps, and then you'll know that it works. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and do that. So this is recording. Let me minimize these windows. All right. So you'll need to install VirtualBox, which is this icon that you see here. So you'll double click on it. And the instructions should tell you everything. You'll have, since you're following the, okay, since you're following the instructions, right? You'll have something that looks like this. That's the Seed Ubuntu 2004 virtual machine. All right, so it's highlighted. If you, for some reason, at some point, we might do a lab where we need to have 3 Linux machines, right? So what that means is you have one that's the original and you create clones of that original. So then they'll appear here. So you'll have like a second one, a third one, a fourth one, and so on. And it doesn't just have to be Ubuntu. It could be other operating systems as well. All right, this is just a virtualizer, basically. All right, so we're going to start it. We're going to click on this button. Okay. Do many of you have laptops? Do you use laptops for the classes? It's good to have a laptop, I would say. If you're in this major, just, get your laptop now if you haven't done so already, and just you'll use it until you graduate. And that's a good investment, I would think. You don't have to get a fancy Mac or get a good Windows. This is the XPS something. This 13-inch. It's a good machine, but you can also get, a Dell. You don't need a lot of power, I wouldn't think, especially nowadays where we can do a lot of things in the cloud, but definitely invest in the computer. Okay, it'll make your life a lot easier. So certainly think about that. All right. And you can ask the professors for like specs and things like that. Or Donna. Donna's really good at that. All right. Anyway. So, so I started the VM, so it's coming up, it's booting up. Okay. Well, it takes a little bit. All right. So this is the environment. As you can see, it's got an account. One of the labs that we will cover in the class is creating accounts, right? So we'll go over, it comes with this default account called a seed account. Operating systems usually have a root account, although there's a whole thing about the root account in Linux, again, for security reasons. So it's funny because I always say that this class is not a security class, but at the end of the day, when you're dealing with Linux, everything somehow ties into some security concept. Okay. Anyway, so we're going to log in. So you just, notice the mouse over here. I'm going to click on seed. Now you can type DEES. All right. And, that's it. And so we're basically in the operating system. Okay. All right. It should be loading. All right. Then this is the environment. Basically, I have a whole bunch of folders in here. So you'll have fewer, but this is your operating system. It's got some, so what I'll do right now is just kind of show you where things are. There's some GUI functionality, obviously, and then we'll get into some of the commands basically. Okay, and I'll repeat some of these things, especially in the beginning, because we'll be using them a lot. I mean, they're just useful. They're just things that we need to use. Okay, so as you can see, the operating system, basically you've got, file here where you can set, this is for the virtual machine. So you can set preferences. You can look at the different devices whenever you need to do some kind of a configuration. All right. Especially when we're doing things that are a little bit more like network related, we'll need to come back here and play with some of these network settings, for instance. Okay. You can view to change to full screen mode, or change like zoom or sizes of the screen, etc. And these are things related to the machine as well. I usually don't do this thing of taking snapshots. I like to properly turn off the machine. Okay. You can hit cancel on this. I don't really want to update it right now. But yeah, so this is basically related to the virtual box and the settings for the virtual machine itself. Then we're here in the environment. You can see here, you can click on this. It's like an applications type of thing. I usually don't use this, but in Windows, this would be like your start button, right? So, but I'll rarely use this. It does come, actually, I think the only thing that might be useful there is Wireshark, but we have a very nice button for that right here, right? An icon, so that, as I said, you will be doing several reading assignments related to Wireshark, okay? And those, I think students usually like those, and they're very simple. I mean, they're literally just following a tutorial. But I won't start that until like week 3 or 4, okay? So right now, it's just going to be getting everyone caught up on Linux and getting everyone on the same page, basically, and with scripting. If you want to turn off the system, you can go over here. You can see there's a little triangle there, an inverted triangle, and then there's power off. So you click on that, and then you power it off. So I usually properly, VMs can get corrupted sometimes, so I like to turn them on and off. This happens sometimes that students, for some reason, end up like the computer just doesn't work, right? So for some odd reasons, you may have a situation where it's just easier to just start over and create a new one and delete it. Okay, but we'll see what happens this semester. All right, so anyway, that's kind of what that's for. Here, you can look at the settings, right? So the internet connections and things like that. So you can take a look at that. So yeah. All right, here, these are folders, right? This is obviously the desktop. This is the icon for Wireshark. This is the, Mozilla Firefox. I think I clicked on it. Taking some time. My computer can be a little bit slow sometimes. All right, so that's just goes, since this is the Seed VM, it goes to the Seed Labs website by default. So we won't really be using the materials here except for the VM this semester, but this is a really good resource that you might see later in other classes. Okay, so that kind of, here you can go to your favorite news or sports website, check that you have internet access. And if you do here, then, everything else should work. Okay. I'll close that. Okay. All right. This is the file system, basically. Window. It's taking a while. All right, while it's thinking there, let's see if we can't hit the terminal instead. So the terminal is actually the thing that we'll be using all semester. And it's basically this icon here. Okay, so we'll be, yeah. Not sure why it's so slow. It kind of like, it's not frozen, but I feel like it's doing some kind of an update. Let's see if I can. Okay, there it is. It's just very slow. I'm sorry. I think it's my computer. I haven't used it since the winter break, and it's probably doing an update or something. But anyway, so when you click on this icon here, it opens this. This is the terminal. Okay, so we'll be doing a lot of our work here. Okay, so most of the semester, everything that we do will happen here in the terminal. So you can see that there. So that's the Linux terminal. All right, so I'm just going to type some commands, and basically we're going to start to get a feel for it. Okay, so I'm going to type ls-l. And I usually like to type, I just almost like naturally type this. Wherever I am in a terminal, it's like the first thing I type. And it just gives me a sense of what's in it. Okay, so the ls is it just means listing. So it's going to tell me what's in here. It also tells me information like where I am, right? Because it's telling me, that this is a folder, right? What the terminal is, what it's doing is it's somewhere in the file system. Okay, by default, it starts there, right? And so it tells me what's contained in that folder. So when I look at these files, I have a sense of where I am. Okay, I know that the desktop is right there. So this background over here is the desktop. So that's, whatever is contained, all these folders should be in there. And then there's other things in there like Anaconda, documents, downloads. I have a text file and other things, right? So it looks like this is my user home or something like that, right? But how can I confirm that? Well, I know it, but it'd be nice if I could confirm that, right? So in your Word document, there's going to be some commands for that. So one of them is pwd, right? So if you type pwd, it now tells you the full path, okay? The full path of the file system. This is extremely important, okay? So these two commands are always very helpful. So again, whether you're doing this, if you have a cheat sheet on GitHub or you have an actual cheat sheet of paper, however you do it, these are commands that you want to write down, because whenever you do something in class and you lose the file, right, this is how you might be able to find it, okay? So that's kind of what we're going to do right now, is just play with this idea, with the file system. So pwd gives you all this really nice information right here. All right, the file system is a tree, and it starts at the top. That's called a root directory. And it's actually just this symbol here, this /. / is like the beginning of everything, okay? And instead of being the roots, it's actually like something at the top. So I'll type it here. So that is the root directory in the beginning of the file system. Then that contains several folders, including one that is called a home folder. Then that folder includes the user account folders. So in this case, we logged in with seed. How do I know that? Well, I wrote seed and then D's, right? So that's the user that I was using. And then, you can see it right there. Okay. All right. So it says seed at VM. Okay. Notice that if you guys already have it, when you have your operating system up and running, this will not show on your environments. This tells me that I've already installed Anaconda. So that's going to be one of the first things we do once we've gone through the basic commands is we're going to install Anaconda, and we'll go over why that is useful, okay, as we write our Python scripts and so on. And we'll talk about environments and what they are and why that's useful. So it's a lot of things. A lot of things nowadays are a concept called containerization. Okay, so basically what that means is you're always creating like a wrapper around everything. So imagine in code, for instance, you have a function, and then that function works really well, but then sometimes you want that function, but with a slight variation, right? So you wrap code around it, and that's a code wrapper. So this happens a lot in when you're dealing with cloud issues or Linux issues or things like that. You containerize things, right? Even VirtualBox, right? It's a way of containerizing a whole operating system into a VM, right? So, and Anaconda is going to be that as well. All right, so that's a big concept it's a common theme, I should say, that we will see later on. But for now, just be aware that's what this is. I'm just in the base Anaconda environment, okay? And I haven't really set up another environment yet. All right, so anyway, let's go back to the idea of the file system, right? So I am here, ls-l. Notice that when I type, now if I just type ls, actually, let me type clear. I should start here. Clear is important because it basically clears the screen. So we don't have all this stuff that's kind of confusing and overwhelming, right? If I just type ls, I just get a list of all the contents of this folder, right? Which folder? If I type pwd, I know it's home C, okay? But commands have actually flags. So in this case, I'm invoking the command ls followed by -l. That means that I want now the listing, but I want it with more detail, okay? Now, it's important that I should stress that all these things like this ls here, they're basically just scripts as well. So a lot of the class, we're going to create our own scripts, and you can create scripts in many scripting languages like Python or Bash, which is the native environment for Linux. But these commands that we type, they're also scripts. They're just like they're default scripts of the operating system. They're usually going to be in a specific folder like the bin folder, and they're just there, right, to improve the functionality of the operating system, but they're really not that different from the scripts that you will be writing in the class, okay? So they may be better, more, optimal and efficient, but they are scripts, okay? And they are files and access control, influences them. Anyway, so we know where we are. We know that we're in home C. We do ls-l, and we see now the contents of this folder, but we see it with a lot more detail, okay? So there's a lot going on in here. Basically, if I think of this, the first thing that comes to my mind is access control. Access control is like central to Linux, right? And it just has to do with basically resources, which are files, right, of any kind, and then users, right, and the permissions that users have to these files, right, for the actions that they can take. So can they read the files? Can they write to the file? And can they execute the file, right? So we'll spend I'm not going to get into access control today, but we'll spend, you know, a week where we actually look at all those details and do a few exercises on access control. But for now, every row here is a file, and then in that row, you have all the corresponding information for that file. So we know, for instance, the size of it. So this is very useful, right? To know, you know, if a file has a lot of contents or very little contents or zero contents. So we can look at that. It's like the number of bytes that's in there. All right, then we have this, which is the user and the group. So whenever you create a file, you associate with it the user of the file, like the owner of it, who owns the file, but also who can have access to this. And when you want multiple users to have access to a file, you can create this thing called groups that contain several users, and then that can go here. Okay, so by default, when you create things, they have the same name for the user and the group, but that can be changed. These parameters here, well, this parameter in particular has meaning. So if you notice, this one has a D and this one has a hyphen or a dash. Do you guys know what that is for? Can anyone tell me what this is telling you about this row? Any ideas? Well, the D actually means that it's a directory. Okay, so if you notice also they're highlighted in blue, so that's also very helpful. If you notice, the only one that doesn't start with a D is this one. And if you notice, it's not colored, doesn't have a color. And basically, when you have this like that, a dash, it means that it's a file. Okay, so there's the difference. Now, I did say everything is a file, including directories, which is true internally, but semantically, one is a directory and one is an actual file, a text file in this case. The extensions don't really matter. And then we do have a lot of binary files also that we can manipulate. And so we will look at those later on. Okay. All right. So, but I'm just giving you some of the basics. This thing here talks about the number of links. So links is another thing that happens in Linux. So for instance, in a program, you want to say that you want to use Java. But really, the Java that you download is Java 3, Java 4, and it changes constantly, right? So sometimes what you can say is, okay, point to Java in general, and then all my programs point to Java, but then there's going to be a link to the actual version that I'm using. So it just makes it easier to manage things. So when you're updating software, you don't have to update everything. Everything just stays with the word Java, and then that Java can be changed just one link to another file. Anyway, that's an important one. So just to recap, obviously the date that it was last modified, year, etc., the name of the file, whether it's a directory or a file, the size of it. And then what about these? What do you guys think these are? Maybe you've seen this before somewhere. It was mentioned to you in a class. What do you think they represent? Those there's an R, a W, and X. Then there's an R, a dash, and an X. And there's an R. Yeah, go ahead.
Or the read, write, and execute.
Yes, that's read, write, and execute. And that's basically access control. It basically, if you notice, there's 9 in total, right? So there's 3 items, each containing 3 things, which are these words R, W, and X. Okay, and so it has to do with access control and who owns that file and what they can do with it. Okay, so we'll explore that later on. So for instance, one example is this file, micron.txt. So just to give you a very quick intro here, if you look at it, the first 3, right, refer to the owner of it. The next 3 refer to the group. So in this case would be this group. But remember, the group can change. And then the last 3 refers to the rest of the world. So that means anyone else in the operating system, another account. Because remember, this could be a Linux server that's, you know, over there, and all of you could have access to it, right? So all of you would have an account, would be able to log in. So you're all in this operating system. So definitely you don't want, you know, you want to have some security so that, you know, certain files can only be accessed by their owners. So if you notice here, the W, which means write, right? You can see the W there, is present here and here. So what that indicates is that this file can be written by the owner and by the group, whatever this is, right? They can write to the file. Like literally they can go in and, if it's code, change it, or if it's a document, a contract, change it. But for the rest of the world, you will notice that the W is no longer there. There's a dash now. So that means that the rest of the world does not have access to write to this file. Does that make sense? So that's just a really quick intro explanation to access control. All right. So we'll come back to this later in the semester and we'll look at some of these concepts. Anyway, so we've done ls-l. So I'm going to do clear again. So again, I want to know where I am. So ls-l. Now I want to go, remember, you're in the tree, so you have to visualize that. I want to go into desktop. So to go into the desktop, you type cd, which means change directory. And now you can type desktop. Keep in mind, make a note that Linux is case sensitive. So you have to type, the proper case. I'm going to hit the tab here. So it auto completes, right? And so now I can go in here and type enter. So now if I do clear, I am now in the desktop. So I have gone into that next folder, right? If I do ls-l, you can see now I have some folders in there, which are probably these over here because I'm in the desktop. Now I can confirm by typing pwd again. Notice that now it says home seed desktop, okay? And demo CA, so that's there. Demo CA old, that's there. Scavenger hunt, that's there. And you can see. So these are whatever you see here, right? In this blue thing is what we're seeing in the command line. In general, we're going to do everything here. Now, when I was trying to open this thing and it froze, what I wanted to say was, I just remembered, students initially start here, like natural. You go into this file system, you create the files there. You're going to encounter a lot of permission issues if you do that. Okay, and eventually it becomes like you're stuck in some problem. I recommend that you use the terminal for most of the semester. Use this semester just to practice on the terminal. You know how to use GUIs for folders and stuff. Don't do that here. Eventually, you'll learn to appreciate it because it's really nice, especially with permissions, etc., that to do things correctly here, and then you won't have a problem, and then you become really efficient. Okay. One of the common themes in this class is actually that efficiency, right? Being fast. So one of the reasons why we write these scripts is for automation. Okay. So that you don't have to type. Let's say that I want to create 30 accounts, right? 30 accounts on this machine. And I need to know the names and everything. I could do it manually, but that would take me, I don't know, an hour, 2 hours. Or I could just have a nice little script that just takes in some input, some file, and run it, and it's done in a minute. Do you see that? So yeah, it takes you a while to write the script initially, but if you're doing this every 2 months or so, eventually you'd rather just have the script because, as I said, creating the account manually, you have to first remember how to do it. So you got to look that up, and then you have to like, oh, did I make a mistake? And you're losing an hour to two hours in a day doing that manually. Or you just run your scripts. You have all your scripts for all the administration, and then it makes you really efficient. So it's up to you how you use your time. Also, the fact that you have a script that it's been proven to work, then it guarantees that you're doing it right every time, instead of just manually having to make mistakes as you're doing it. Does that make sense? So one of the common themes of the class is that, and all operating systems do this, right? Windows, I'm sure when you took the equivalent of this class for Windows, you did PowerShell or something like that, or you will do PowerShell, right? So there's all these ideas, okay? Windows has PowerShell, Linux has scripts like Bash and Python, and we'll cover Bash a little bit much later in the semester. Bash is harder, but it does have, it's obviously more native, so it is faster, and it has some advantages as well. Those are the only two scripting languages. There's Perl, which is a really old one. I don't plan to use that one. Rust, a new thing. I don't plan to use that. That's kind of outside the scope, but definitely those two. All right, so we went into the desktop. Now we went into the tree. Now let's go back up, I guess, in this idea, if you're picturing the tree. So I want to, again, PWD. All right, so now I want to go up. All right, so this is something that may be confusing sometimes. You know, you see this command and you don't like, what does that mean? Well, we've already used the CD, right? That just means change directory. We type desktop here and it worked. But now you can add a dot or you can add 2 dots, right? And basically the dot in general means the current working directory. Okay, so just keep that in mind, okay? So whenever you just want, wherever you are, that's your current working directory. That's a dot. If you have 2 dots, it means the parent of the current working directory. So so literally when you're typing this one over here, cd ... it's the equivalent of going off, going back up. All right, so let's prove that. So again, let me do clear here. I'm going to do PWD, right? So you can see I'm in home seed desktop. Now I want to go to just home seed. So cd ... Okay, PWD, and you can see I have gone up again to where I started. Okay, I can do ls-l just to confirm where I am. Okay, let's go all the way up. All right, so then I'm going to do clear ls-l, clear PWD. Okay, now I want to go to home, so I do the same cd ... Okay, ls-l. You can see there's other folders and files in here. Now you start to see things like root in here. You know, why is that root? Now keep in mind your system may not have these files just because I've used this VM in the past. Okay, but this tells us that there is a root account. Now you will probably, whenever you have a problem, you will be inclined to just enable root and just solve it through root. But you will find that actually for Ubuntu versions, root is disabled by default. That is a choice for security reasons. So then you're wondering, well, how do I do root or administrator things? Well, then we use the sudo mechanism. Okay, it means super user command, I think. Can't remember exactly. You'll research this for the homework, what it means, and provide a short 2-sentence definition. But basically, this is what allows you to gain, that's what it's called, to gain the administrator privilege. So the way that works in Linux is that every account that you create potentially could be an administrator. All you have to do is you have to go to the sudoers list, which means it's a list of everybody that can gain the root privilege, and you just add that account into that list. Okay, and now, for instance, seed by default is in the sudoers list. That means that the seed account can become an administrator and do anything that root would do. Okay, now the idea of that is that it has to do with accountability. It has to do with like logging and tracking. If you only had a root account in this machine, and let's say you had 6 administrators, and they all want to fix a problem or do some bad thing, they would take the root account, do something, make the change, and then, log out. The problem there is you wouldn't know who did it, right? It could be any of the 6 administrators because they all know the user and password. So instead, what's preferred is that the root account is disabled by default, and then everyone has to use their own user. So the 6 administrators now each has their own account for their name, but they can become administrators, by gaining the root privilege with the sudo command. Okay, so we'll see how that works later on. A lot of the configurations and things in Linux are text files, so we'll be able to take a look at that. But anyway, that's the idea behind that. So there is a root account. It's just disabled by default. And instead, when an administrator needs to do administrator stuff, they can use their own account as long as they're in the sudoers list. Okay. And that is really important for tracking and, auditing and things like that. You always know who did what in the system because it's logged somewhere. Does that make sense, guys? Again, just this is what you should practice on once you get your VMs set up by Thursday, make sure you just repeat all of this and, practice. All right. So I think we were going all the way up. So I'm going to do, yeah. So I know I'm here. I'm going to do PWD. Okay. So I want the home folder. So you can see we're almost at the root. The root has some very important folders. Home basically means where all the accounts have a home folder. So all, whenever we log in, right? So all of you have your Windows machine probably, and you log in, and then it immediately takes you to the desktop, right? Well, in Linux, you need to have a folder for that desktop and some specific programs that you're going to be using. Okay, so here it's got all those things are going to be in the home folder of the root tree data structure of the file system. All right, so we want to go now, since we're in the home folder, we want to go all the way up to the root. So then what do? CD ... Okay, so we should now be at the root. And there it is. The root, as I said, is just that /. Okay. Okay, so sometimes that can be tricky. So there may be a common thing that happens is that students forget to include the root. If you don't include the root, what happens is it's not going to start at the root. It might start at the current working directory. And so things won't work. Okay, so that's like a full path or a relative path that maybe you're familiar with. All right, so now, let's do ls. We have the common thing that you see most of the time in Linux. You see this a lot when people talk about Linux. These are the most important folders in the file system. They're very common across Linux distributions, although there's variations here and there. But in general, you have a bin folder, you have a lib folder, you have an etc folder, you have a mount mnt folder, you have a proc folder, you'll have a temp folder, you'll have a var folder, the boot folder will be there, device, home, which is the one that we were in. So we were in this one. Seed was here. Okay. sbin will be in some systems, user and sys will also be there. All right. Now we won't look at all of these but it's basically how you organize things in the operating system, and they have different meanings. So for instance, var, let's look at this one, var. Let's just, as an example. So var is a folder that has a definition, which basically means the files there can change a lot. They can become big really fast. They can change like every minute or every second. So what are usually good things to put in var? Your log files, right? Log files are, the system is logging everything. So every minute, something is getting logged or something. So that means it changes a lot. Those files change a lot, and therefore they're a good candidate. What that means is that internally, as this was developed, there's probably some code or functionality so that var is faster, or, it's just designed to accommodate the fact that the files change a lot. Does that make sense? Another thing that's common in var, to put in var, is websites. So the var www. So whenever you have, actually one of the things that made Linux really famous, or that allowed it to be adopted really quickly, was the fact that people were using it as a web server. So it was like one of the first uses of Linux. All right. So people first thought, oh, what a great, interesting idea here of an operating system, but they couldn't really find a way to use it. It's maybe like, well, you hear about AI and GPTs nowadays. They're like, oh yeah, they're fun, interesting, but we don't really have a use for them until boom, they find a use for them. And that's kind of the same with Linux. Also, I mean, it's an older technology, obviously, almost 50 years old, I think. Probably since the 70s, right? It's been around, so that's a while. And so initially they didn't really know how to use it outside of labs and things like that. And then all of a sudden people just started creating web servers. And that's important because that's the internet, websites and so on. And we all know that we use websites on a daily basis. So when we get into services, we're going to learn that we have a Linux operating system, but then the Linux operating system needs to do things, right? And one classic example of a functionality for it, as I said, the one that made it really popular is to make it a web server. So that means it's hosting some websites and so on. And that's basically, those files can go in var, and you're going to need to have a service running, which is usually called Apache or Apache 2. It's the default Linux server. So we'll talk about that later. And you might develop a little website. All right, so so that was an example. Bin is usually where your scripts are going to live. All right, the default scripts for your Linux operating system. etc is an important folder that we will use quite a bit this semester. It's basically related to configuration. So whenever you have a service like Apache or you have DNS or something like that, SSH, whatever it is, the associated configuration files will live in etc. So then you'll go to etc, you'll find the files, but these files are usually, because they have to do with the operation of the operating system, they're going to be restricted to administrator privileges only. So then to make changes, you will have to do, since we don't have root, we'll have to use the sudoers command to gain the root privilege. You see how that works? Any questions so far? Right. All right. So these are, important concepts. So etc, currently I'm just mentioning what these folders are for. So as I said, bin has like the ls commands and so on. etc has configuration files in general. Mount is where you would mount things, like if you have a hard drive and you want to mount. So we'll cover that up towards the end of the semester. Proc is something very special of when you want to hook things to the Linux kernel itself. All right. So there's, especially if you have like outside data that can't live in the kernel. The kernel is like the heart of the operating system. Okay. For you to make a change to the kernel, you would literally have to compile everything. Okay. But there's ways that you can like interface with that efficiently. And then this is a place where you would store the data for that, for an application that does that. Temp is a folder where you have your temporary files. So anything that you put in temp will be gone when you turn off the machine. Okay, it's a temporary file by definition. Home, as I said, is where we had our file, and and these are just other places where you can put executable files, etc. Okay, so I think this is good enough for today. My goal was just to get you guys to download the CVM, follow the instructions, build it up, and have your Linux machine set up, and then you'll want to know if it works. So you should do all these things. If you can do all these things, like check the internet and navigate the file system up and down, you're ready to go. And then we can start getting into the other commands. Now, I want to just return to where we started. So I'm going to do ls-l, right? So, whoa, where are we? Right? So you might be worried. So then pwd, okay, I'm in root. Okay. Because you'll see a lot of information. So now we need to go back, right? So here it's difficult to do ls-l, just use ls. There's home. So I want to go into home. And do I do that, or do I just do that? Right? So, second choice, right? Remember, whenever you type that / it's going to think you want to go to the root. So just keep that in mind. All right, so now I do ls-l, okay. I do pwd, okay. Home. So I want to go into, where do I want to go now? Seed. That's my home folder because I want to get to the desktop, right? So I'm going to do seed ls-l, and there's the desktop. So desktop. All right, and that's it. So this is basically what you should do. Is, as I said, it's not a homework. But just between now and Thursday before class, try to get your VM and do this, and then we'll pick up there. Okay, and then you'll get your first homework assignment and so on. All right, I'll stay for a few minutes. The classes will run until 5:40 always, and from the beginning to 5:40, and I'll stay a few minutes if you have questions. Otherwise, I will see you guys on Thursday.